Ilhan Omar recently accused the Vice President of the United States of violently yanking up the ladder on every refugee in the nation. She delivered this accusation directly to the face of a man who was raised in a home where the only available ladder was a fire escape attached to a meth lab, and who scaled it anyway, rung by painful rung with bloodied hands and absolutely zero safety nets. She labeled him a complete hypocrite. In response, he calmly asked her about the last time she ever expressed genuine gratitude. On May 22, 2025, the floor of the United States Senate hosted a special joint session addressing immigration reform. This brought about the highly unusual, though constitutionally permitted spectacle of House members directly addressing the Senate chamber for matters demanding bicameral deliberation. Vice President J.D. Vance sat anchored in the presiding chair, a ceremonial position where the VP is constitutionally required to be present, but is generally expected to remain entirely silent. Representative Ilhan Omar, representing Minnesota's 5th Congressional District, had been officially invited to articulate the House Progressive Caucus's position. Standing firmly at the podium, her headscarf impeccably arranged, her voice echoed through the Senate's historic oak-paneled chamber. However, instead of engaging with immigration policy, she dramatically pivoted to face the presiding officer's chair. She locked eyes directly with J.D. Vance, and she took aim. Smash that like button, because you are about to witness the Vice President of the United States neutralize a vicious attack with a question so profoundly simple and deeply human that the woman confronting him couldn't summon a single syllable for 10 agonizing seconds. Vice President Vance. Omar pronounced his name with the heavy, loaded inflection of a prosecutor addressing an already convicted defendant. The atmosphere in the Senate chamber instantly shifted. Senators scrolling through their phones snapped their heads up. Whispering aides froze. The protocol for a House representative speaking in the Senate is explicitly clear. You address the institutional body, Mr. President or Madam President, never the chair directly, and you certainly do not address them with that level of venom. You are the poster child for pulling up the ladder. Omar's voice carried the calculated, practiced cadence of 1,000 House floor speeches, specifically engineered to generate 8-second sound bites for the evening news. You successfully escaped destitution. Congratulations. And your very first act in power was to slam the door on every refugee, every immigrant, and every individual desperately attempting to achieve exactly what you did. She gripped the edges of the podium with both hands. It wasn't out of nervousness. Omar was never nervous behind a microphone. She gripped it so her knuckles would turn white, projecting visible conviction for the 6 broadcast cameras documenting her every move. You authored a best-selling book about the American dream that brought you immense fame and wealth. Then you secured elected office and deliberately made it harder for everyone else to pursue that exact dream. You are a hypocrite in a tailored suit, Mr. Vice President. A man who relentlessly exploited every safety net in America, only to vote to slash them all. She paused intentionally. The Senate chamber fell into the tense, specific silence of 100 powerful people realizing a boundary was about to be crossed, with no mechanism to stop it. Let's be brutally honest about what you truly are. Omar's chin elevated, the defiant chin that had aggressively faced down Fox News panels, congressional censure votes, and relentless death threats. You didn't pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You married into Yale elite. You gladly accepted Peter Thiel's billions. You loyally serve a president who publicly mocked your own people as hillbillies right up until he desperately needed their ballots. She allowed the insult to marinate. You are not a champion of the working class. You are a political prop, a convenient prop armed with a tragic backstory. The entire chamber exhaled. Not a gasp, but the collective release of breath from a room anticipating a severe blow that finally landed. Up on the presiding officer's dais, J.D. Vance remained perfectly still. It was not the frozen stillness of a stunned politician, nor the calculated stillness of a man formulating a rapid-fire comeback. It was the deeply grounded stillness of a man from Middletown, Ohio, who had routinely endured far more vicious verbal assaults from his own mother during her darkest pill-fueled nights. He had learned as a 13-year-old boy that the loudest person in the room is almost never the strongest. He didn't nervously shift his weight. He didn't adjust his necktie or reach for a glass of water. He simply observed Omar with an expression perfectly captured by C-SPAN camera 3. Not anger, not amusement, and not contempt. It was recognition. The quiet, knowing recognition of a man who had witnessed this exact playbook before. The "you're one of them now" grievance narrative, which dictates that the only authentic poor person is one who never actually escapes poverty. He waited until her final echo faded. Then he waited 3 additional seconds, demonstrating the ultimate patience of a man completely confident in his own words. Leaning toward his microphone, the vice president's voice emerged quietly. Representative Omar. It was a flat, Midwestern quiet, the kind that refuses to compete with surrounding noise but slices through it effortlessly, like a perfectly sharpened blade. Thank you. I sincerely appreciate your passion. He paused. I would like to tell you a story today. Actually, I'd like to share 2 stories, mine and yours, because when we evaluate them side by side, something fascinating occurs. I was raised in Middletown, Ohio, Vance stated. He spoke the town's name with the smooth, worn syllables of a man who doesn't just hail from a place but is fundamentally constructed from it. Population: 48,000 and shrinking. It used to be a thriving steel town. By the time I came of age, it had devolved into a pill town. He shifted his gaze across the room, addressing the 100 senators in the gallery. My mother was an addict, not in the clinical, abstract terminology utilized in sterile policy briefings, substance use disorder, or opioid crisis statistics. She was an addict in the brutal reality where a 13-year-old boy arrives home from school to find her unconscious on the bathroom floor, forced to decide whether to dial 911 or handle it himself, knowing the last ambulance call resulted in her refusing to speak to him for 2 weeks. The Senate chamber, previously buzzing from Omar's assault, went completely flat. I lived in a household, and I'm being transparent because I wrote a book about this, it's no secret, where prescription pill bottles vastly outnumbered the food in our refrigerator. Our electricity was shut off 3 separate times in a single year. My mother cycled through 14 different boyfriends in 4 years, with each one representing a fresh version of the exact same catastrophe. Vance's hands rested flat and open on his desk, lacking any tension. They were the hands of a man who had completely made peace with his traumatic history, treating his past like a scar he neither hides nor proudly displays. Then my grandmother, Mama, took me in. She was 60 years old, smoked like an absolute chimney, and kept a loaded .38 caliber revolver tucked under her mattress. And she fundamentally saved my life. She didn't save it with a government program or a federal check. She saved it by looking at me every single day and declaring, "JD, you are not trash. Don't you ever let anybody convince you that you are." He briefly looked down at his hands before making eye contact again. America provided me with that. It gave me Mama. It provided a recruiting office in Middletown where a Marine sergeant looked at a scrawny, underfed kid from a meth den and said, "You'll do." America gave me the GI Bill. It gave me Ohio State. It gave me Yale Law School, where, yes, representative, I met my wonderful wife. And eventually, America granted me the privilege to sit in this chair. He looked directly at Omar, his demeanor almost gentle rather than confrontational. Now, let me accurately recount your story, because it is an equally remarkable one. He leaned forward slightly. You were born in Mogadishu in 1982. A brutal civil war erupted when you were just 8 years old. Your family fled. You didn't merely relocate or immigrate, you fled for your lives, grabbing only what you could carry, refusing to look back at horrors you prayed your children would never witness. Vance spoke of her history with a precise empathy that stunned the chamber, treating her trauma with the exact same gravity as his own. You survived 4 grueling years in the Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya. I've studied Dadaab. 90,000 residents, virtually no running water, and 1 single physician for every 20,000 people. You were an innocent child. You didn't select that life. No child consciously chooses a displacement camp, just as no child chooses a narcotics den. The heavy comparison landed perfectly. 2 traumatized children, 2 nightmares, and the exact same nation waiting at the end of both journeys. In 1995, the United States of America, this exact country, the one you just aggressively accused me of betraying, officially admitted your family as refugees. Out of every possible sovereign nation on Earth, this one said yes. It resettled you in Arlington, Virginia, and eventually Minneapolis. It handed you citizenship. It provided public schooling, the very public schools you currently critique. It granted you the right to vote and the profound right to run for federal office. And you triumphed twice. You ascended from a squalid refugee camp in Kenya to the United States Congress. Vance allowed the massive arc of her life, from camp to Congress, to settle over the room, mirroring his own journey from a meth house to the vice presidency. Two identical trajectories, drawn by the exact same country. Representative Omar, America handed us both absolutely everything. Not a flawless everything, and certainly not an easy everything. It was an everything laced with extreme struggle and failure. But it was everything. The operative question isn't what America handed us. The question is what we contributed in return. Omar parted her lips, a defensive word beginning to form, but the chamber knew Vance wasn't finished. His voice hadn't spiked in volume. A rising voice indicates someone desperately reaching for a point, while a level voice proves the point is already secured. September 11th, 2001. Vance continued. I was a 17-year-old high school senior. Second period, Mrs. Patterson's English class. We were ushered into the cafeteria, where we watched the second plane strike the World Trade Center live on television. The very next day, September 12th, 4 of my high school classmates marched directly into the Marine recruiting office on Main Street. They didn't wait for a presidential address or an invasion order. They simply asked, "Where do I sign?" One of those boys never came back whole. He survived, and he currently works at a local warehouse. But he left a massive piece of his soul in Fallujah. Vance locked eyes with Omar. That is exactly how Middletown reacted to September 11th. We enlisted. He let the silence hang for 3 grueling seconds. Representative Omar, at a 2019 Kier fundraising event, you summarized September 11th with the following phrase. He didn't check any notes. The quote was permanently burned into the nation's memory. Some people did something. A visceral reaction rippled through the gallery, a sound caught between a gasp and a murmur. 3,000 Americans were slaughtered. Firefighters sprinted up stairwells fully aware they would never walk back down. Office workers dialed their families from the 90th floor to say their final goodbyes. Passengers on Flight 93 forcefully stormed a hijacked cockpit. The kids I played football with joined the Marine Corps because of the horror of that specific day. Vance's jaw noticeably tightened, his only physical tell honed in a volatile childhood and perfected at Paris Island, revealing raw, unfiltered emotion. And your chosen description was something. Those weren't random people, Representative. They were Al-Qaeda terrorists. And it wasn't merely something. It was the deadliest attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor. My friends bled and died because of that tragedy, and you flippantly reduced it to something. Omar's posture remained rigid, but her eyes briefly darted downward, a microscopic deviation, like a compass needle temporarily disrupted by a passing magnet, proving the rhetorical strike had penetrated her armor. Let me be completely honest about something, Vance warned, deploying his signature phrase that signaled the safety was coming off the weapon. When I released Hillbilly Elegy, I was harshly criticized by my own community in Appalachia. They accused me of airing our dirty laundry and making our dying town look pathetic. And they were absolutely correct. I exposed our deepest flaws because I fundamentally believe you cannot fix a broken system without brutally honest accountability. I refuse to cover it up or blame the investigators. He turned back to Omar. Representative, your specific Somali American community in Minneapolis encountered a massive problem, too. The Feeding Our Future federal nutrition program scandal. Between 2020 and 2022, over $250 million, potentially up to $9 billion, was blatantly stolen. It was the largest pandemic fraud operation in American history, resulting in 75 federal defendants. Let me paint a picture of what $250 million in stolen child nutrition funds looks like. A designated feeding site on Riverside Avenue claimed to serve 5,000 meals daily. When federal investigators visited, they found 0 children, 5,000 meals billed, 0 mouths actually fed. That taxpayer money was aggressively laundered into luxury cars, overseas real estate in Kenya and Turkey, and multi-million-dollar property portfolios. Vance paused, ensuring the chamber felt the weight of the theft. These weren't random strangers, Representative. These were prominent organizations within your 5th district. Your own constituents orchestrated this fraud. And when the FBI and DOJ arrived to investigate why ghost children were generating millions, you immediately went on the record. You called the federal investigation chaos. You didn't condemn the massive theft. You attacked the investigators, claiming the government was criminalizing community organizations. Vance slowly shook his head, thoroughly disgusted by the math. When my hometown suffered from addiction and broken families, I wrote about it with agonizing honesty, costing me friendships and Thanksgiving dinners. I did it because the kids trapped in meth houses deserved the truth. When your community suffered from blatant fraud, stealing directly from starving children, you provided political cover. You attacked the authorities, and those children remained hungry. Omar visibly shifted her weight from her left foot to her right, rapidly recalculating her position on completely destabilized ground. Behind her, a young aide in a gray suit began furiously scribbling notes, not to defend his boss, but the panicked notes of a staffer realizing he needed a new job. "Let's discuss finances, Representative." Vance pushed forward mercilessly. Omar's chin tilted upward, her instinctive physiological armor engaging. "I generated my wealth transparently. A publisher bought my book, people purchased it, and the transaction was flawlessly clean. My venture capital investments were fully disclosed. My tax returns are entirely public. But let's analyze your campaign's official FEC-registered disbursements. You funneled an astonishing $3.7 million to the E Street Group, a consulting firm entirely managed by Tim Minott, your husband." The gallery remained dead silent, absorbing the concrete numbers delivered in Vance's unyielding Midwestern tone. $3.7 million routed through your spouse's enterprise. After an official FEC complaint was filed, your campaign miraculously amended its filings to show payments that were previously hidden. Furthermore, $1.7 million tied to his secondary cannabis and winery ventures remains virtually untraceable. When a politician routes millions of campaign dollars to their spouse while simultaneously hiding unaccounted cash, we don't call that entrepreneurship. The accurate term is a pattern. Vance turned a single page in his unadorned manila folder. Finally, regarding the immigration question you introduced in your attack, there are highly credible, extensively documented allegations investigated by the Minneapolis Star-Tribune that you legally married your own brother, Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi, in 2009 specifically to commit immigration fraud. You vehemently deny this, yet you have spent years utilizing legal maneuvers and fighting congressional subpoenas to block the release of your 2009 tax returns, the exact documents that could definitively clear your name. He closed the folder with the gentle finality of finishing a book. "I earned my wealth dissecting my own trauma. You generated yours by funneling campaign cash to your husband, amending your filings only after getting caught. That is the fundamental difference." Omar's hand dropped to her hip, her fingers curling anxiously against her jacket fabric, desperate to find a commanding gesture but discovering none. Vance leaned back into the presiding officer's chair, his posture softening dramatically as he put away the data and reached for something infinitely more profound. "Representative Omar, I want to share something deeply personal. I genuinely hope you hear it." His voice dropped to an intimate register, speaking directly to her despite the crowded room. "I wake up every single day profoundly grateful, not the hollow political, grateful to serve rhetoric. I mean the genuine gratitude where you lie awake at 5 a.m. and say, 'Thank you,' out loud to a grandmother who is no longer here to hear it. I am endlessly grateful to the Marine drill sergeant who screamed at me for 16 weeks until I evolved from a terrified Ohio kid into a man. I'm grateful to my high school teachers who refused to abandon me when my grades plummeted during my mother's relapses." His previously clinical face now displayed raw, unfiltered sadness. "I am profoundly grateful to America. Not an abstract theory of a nation, but this beautifully flawed, tangible country that extracted a kid from a meth house and allowed him to become vice president. My gratitude is exactly what I give back. He paused for a long, heavy moment. Representative Omar, the identical nation extracted you from a squalid Kenyan refugee camp and handed you a seat in the United States Congress. When was the last time you stood at a podium and said something genuinely kind about the country that saved your life? The question struck the Senate chamber like a massive bell echoing in an empty cathedral. He wasn't asking for a policy endorsement or a qualified compliment. He was asking for basic, unconditional kindness. Omar stood frozen at the podium. Her mouth opened slightly, forming the ghost of a syllable, but nothing materialized. Because the question wasn't about FEC filings, immigration fraud, or stolen nutrition funds. It was a moral question centered on a single word. When? And she couldn't summon a single instance. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4. The entire chamber collectively counted the expanding silence in their chests. 5 seconds. 6. 7. Omar's aide completely stopped writing, his pen hovering paralyzed over his notepad. 8 seconds. 9. Vance refused to rescue her or fill the void, waiting with the immense, practiced patience of a man who understood that silence is incredibly devastating. 10 full seconds. Omar's perpetually defiant chin finally stabilized into a neutral, thoroughly defeated posture. She possessed no answer. I say thank you every single day, Vance whispered softly. I thank the Marines, my teachers, my mama, and this nation. Meanwhile, your public record of gratitude consists of claiming it's all about the Benjamins, reducing the 9/11 massacre to some people did something, praising pro-Hamas extremists celebrating October 7th, and getting formally removed from the Foreign Affairs Committee because your bipartisan colleagues explicitly decided you could not be trusted to represent American interests. He didn't raise his voice a single decibel. That is exactly what you gave back to the country that saved your life. Vance slowly stood up, a highly unusual move for the presiding officer, signaling a definitive closing rather than a power play. We are both authentic children of the American dream. The difference isn't our political parties. The difference is that I know the dream is real because I actively lived it. But you have dedicated your entire career to pretending this dream is a complete myth. Because if America is truly magnificent enough to transform a Somali refugee into a powerful congresswoman, your entire lucrative grievance narrative collapses instantly. You cannot simultaneously be a victim of the nation that rescued you. You can only be shockingly ungrateful. He sat back down. The untouched gavel rested on his desk. The session was functionally over. The Senate chamber strictly forbids applause, but a physical wave of shifting bodies rippled through the room. The unmistakable movement of powerful people who had just witnessed the most rhetorically flawless, devastating counterattack of the decade. Omar quietly gathered her documents, tapping them against the podium twice with mechanical precision to give her shaking hands something normal to do. She walked out of the chamber in total, humiliating silence, fully aware that a barrage of reporters was currently waiting in the hallway to ask her the exact same unanswerable question. The 63-second clip highlighting the 10 seconds of silence broke the internet immediately, racking up 28 million views within 4 hours. Hashtag Omar Silence dominated global trends. Fox News broadcasted the full 22-minute exchange completely uncut, recognizing that the raw footage was more powerful than any graphic. On CNN, a former Obama communications director awkwardly fumbled through her notes on live television, desperately searching for a historical quote where Omar praised America, only to find absolutely nothing. The two refugees framing became a cultural touchstone, totally neutralizing standard political defenses because it wasn't about race or religion. It was an undeniable indictment of gratitude. The cultural impact was instantaneous. A Congolese refugee pastor in Tulsa preached a sermon titled Two Refugees that garnered 4 million YouTube views. A veteran Arab-American civics teacher in Dearborn played the clip for her students, resulting in the most profound, productive classroom silence of her 20-year career. In Ohio, 41-year-old Tyler Boggs, a warehouse logistics worker managing a shattered knee from Fallujah, watched the clip on his phone. He lived just 3 blocks from Vance's childhood home. Remembering his deployment after the September 12th recruiting rush, Tyler stared at his old dress blues photograph sitting next to a stack of unpaid bills. JD said it right, Tyler whispered to his empty kitchen. We joined because of that day. She called it something. In Minneapolis, right in the heart of Little Mogadishu, Abdi Farah methodically wiped down the counter of his convenience store. Having escaped Nairobi decades ago to build a secure life for his daughters, he watched Omar's televised silence on a small screen above the register. Abdi slowly looked up at the bilingual sign mounted prominently above his front door that simply read, "Welcome. I say thank you every day," Abdi muttered quietly, ignoring the political chaos. His thriving store, his safe family, his welcoming sign, that was his undeniable daily gratitude to the country that took him in. She labeled him a hypocritical fraud. He shared the brutal reality of his grandmother. She dismissed him as a political prop. He vividly recalled the sacrifices of September 12th. She aggressively attacked his policies. He simply demanded to know the last time she expressed genuine gratitude. The result? 10 agonizing seconds of deafening silence from a politician and a profound, enduring lesson in American appreciation delivered by the everyday citizens who actually lived it.